Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Kassel from the University of Michigan-Flint. I am the tutorial coordinator, been here for many, many years. And what I love talking about with people is study skills, methods, and today I want to talk about reading comprehension and improving reading comprehension for college. Two important points that we have to make evident right from the get-go is first of all, reading a textbook is boring. That may surprise you that someone, from a college is telling you that. But nobody reads a textbook for entertainment. That's you don't go to a major bookstore and find textbooks on the shelf. The other thing is that comprehension is difficult, and I like to say these things right up front because a lot of people beat themselves up over, oh, well, it seems like everyone else can read this book and get it, or people read it and they're interested in it and I'm just not. But really, the vast majority of people are not interested in that text, and you've got a 1,600-page book, you're supposed to understand everything in it. That's just not going to happen. So you got to be able to forgive yourself that this isn't an easy task, okay? But it is a manageable one, and so that's what we want to talk about here. And one of the first things is to just get an idea in looking at the textbook is how that memory and retention basics, the memory and retention basics are going to work out for you in this. First of all, people talk a lot about short-term memory, and how they, are able to memorize something. Technically, short-term memory is that little 7-second buffer that you either put something in your head and it's going to go in there to long-term, or you're going to forget it. What we really want to talk about is this thing known as working memory, and that's the thing where you're looking over your notes, or in the case of a book, you're reading your textbook, and you're going by that working memory, that thing that's keeping it fresh, okay? Because the stuff is all back there once it's made it through your short-term memory, but the reason that we don't recall it is because there's so much stuff in there that the stuff that we recall is going to be that working memory. And in order to do that, we rehearse that information. We go over it, and that's a way of getting active with this. So, if you just remember that all you're doing is putting this into that working memory and rehearsing that information as you need it. So you don't have to remember the entire textbook. You just have to remember what you need at a specific time. Now, there's two types of readings that I'm going to talk about. The vast majority of it is going to be the survey text. But first of all, we have these treatises, which is like a single subject book, like the history of Henry Ford's Model T, very singular subject book that one person wrote about. And those you get in classes, but the main thing that you work with are those survey texts, also known as textbooks. That's your big thing, and they call it a survey because it is a survey. It's an overview of a very, very broad topic, and they give you little individual parts of it. So those are the two types of reading that we're talking about, and survey texts are the main things that we want to talk about today. The questions that you have for surveys, and by questions I mean the first day in class, things that you should get out of the way with your instructor if no one else is asking them. One of them, what's the purpose in the course, okay? Is this textbook just for my reference? Or are we going to be graded on the material in here? And if they say, yeah, you're going to be graded on a lot of the stuff that's coming out of the text, then you're going to have to spend a lot more time for it than if the instructor tells you, no, it's just kind of for reference, but as long as you go by the notes, you'll be fine. So the other thing is find out if there's a study guide. An instructor may not assign a study guide in the bookstore or on the book list, but almost every survey text that's made has a companion study guide that you can find on, an auction site or a cheap book site, and they're going to be really, really cheap because there's just tons of them out there that very few people order. So you could get one of those used, and what that will do is that will be a brief version. Matter of fact, sometimes there's a thing called a brief version of a text as well. And you can use those to kind of make a little bit of a shorter thing that you have to read in order to hone in on what the most important parts of that survey text is going to be. And if the textbook is going to figure large in the presentation, then you really want to think about using that. And then finally, ask the instructor, how closely do tests follow any of the practice questions? Yet some instructors will take the practice questions and they'll put them right on the exam. So that's something that you would be helpful to know. But the main thing with a survey text is, to get the most out of them, is you want to do this little trick that some of you maybe already know about, and that is using the summaries. At the back of each chapter, or sometimes in a really large chapter in the middle of the chapter at several points, there's going to be summaries. They may call it review or in summary or whatever, but a lot of the texts break it down into certain paragraphs that follow a identified smaller portion of the textbook, and they almost always go in order. So in other words, the summary, the first summary in the summary section is not going to be something that happened at the end of the chapter. It's going to usually follow in order. And so I want to give you an example of a summary here. I'm just going to read it to you. I'm going to read it purposely to you rather quickly at first, and then we'll go over it in a second. This is one from a psych textbook. Events placed in long-term memory are available for recall even years later. One type of long-term memory, known as procedural memory, basically corresponds to habit formation. When long-term memory involves items that relate to specific events in one's life, we speak of episodic memory. By contrast, semantic memory concerns general knowledge that is stored on a long-term basis. Now, I read that quickly to kind of simulate how you may end up reading this. It's like, okay, I'll go over that once. I've read the summary, now I'm ready to go read the textbook, or what was I supposed to get out of that? If you just read it quickly or give it a simple glance, it's not going to be helpful at all. What you need to do now is, before you start reading that first part of the chapter that's dealing with this, you need to take this paragraph, or if it's not written in paragraphs, just a couple of strings of sentences, apart piece by piece, asking things like, what is the summary talking about? In this case, it's talking about memory. Is it just memory? It's actually long-term memory. See, you're thinking about this thing. You're questioning it. All of these, of course, are going to be different because they're going to be different topics. How many types of long-term memory does it mention? Remember, it said that there was a certain number, a certain type. Here it said there was 3. What are the 3 types of long-term memory? And then it had that. If you go back, and you're not being tested on this, so please go back to it. You're taking it apart. Don't do this from memory, right? There's procedural. Okay, what did procedural involve? It involved habits. Okay, all right. So you get a little definition of that. Episodic, and that was events in one's life. Okay, and semantic, which I didn't quite get. General knowledge. Okay, I still don't have to know what this means, but now notice that I've taken a few more seconds, probably less than a minute, to understand this, and now I have a better understanding. I don't have to know what this means, but now I go back to the first part of the chapter, read the part of the chapter in full that deals with long-term memory, and suddenly these items are going to become very familiar to me. Then I'll keep reading until I exhaust what's in that summary, and there may be some things in the book that aren't in the summary. There may, may have to redo them, but, you may have to go through parts that don't have everything necessarily in them. Not everything's going to be covered in the summary, but the most important things are. And so then I'll go on to the next summary, read that, and then I'll go read the book in full. And what you will find with this, by using this technique, if you apply it in the way that we're suggesting that you apply it, or in a way that's going to work for you in some way, shape, or form, you will find that it's going to be much easier for you to retain that material. So that helps with the comprehension part. In treatises, just a few quick tips about this, because this is a whole other subject. Divide the work up, okay? So like, usually you will never have the instructor spring a book on you and say, all right, here's a 200-page book and you've got to have that done by next week. Usually it's in the syllabus, and you'll see that it's like 4 weeks in, you've got to have this 200-page book read. So at the very least, divide that into the 2 to 4 weeks that you have for that, and do a certain number of pages. If you're really interested in it, keep going. If not, at least try to do the minimum number of pages by dividing that work. Read the intros. By that I mean the introductory chapter. It'll either say introduction or chapter 1. Those are really important, because in a lot of academic books, which many of these books are published by an academic press, they outline the entire book usually in that intro chapter or sometimes just the first chapter. So you'll get a really good idea of what that book is about. As you get into the chapters, read the first and last paragraphs because usually the most powerful things are going to be in those first few paragraphs and the last paragraphs, whereas the evidence is presented in much of the rest of it. Look for topic sentences as you're going through the paragraphs in there. What are some of the key points? What are the key terms? And to that end, what you want to do is make sure to look up words. When you run across words that you don't know, the most valuable thing that you can do as a college student is to look up new words. And not just by the regular dictionary definition, but by what is that academic definition. And then write in that book. Get involved in that book. You should do that with your textbooks too. If you're paying for the book, if you're renting the book, you can use pencil usually. Check your contract with that. But try to write in that book. Don't keep your notes in a separate place. Keep them right there in the book. It's going to allow you to engage with that book. And then finally, there are academic reviews of most of these single subject books. And if you can go to your library, usually there's an online resource for this. There's one called JSTOR. There are others that have academic materials available. Most colleges allow access to that. Read a few reviews on the book. It's not going to give you the full picture of the book, but it will give you an idea of what it's about. Again, it's kind of like the summary. It kind of gives you that preview. So I know this a lot. Following these steps, though, can help you to take comprehension instead of going into reading a text and leading with your chin and treating it like a fight. What you can do is try to take a little bit of power over that textbook yourself and try to manage it that way.